Can we just take a moment for this shirt? It says Tyrannosaurus Rex. I love it. Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be so nerdy that we're going to break down and get nerdy about being a nerd. More specifically, I want to talk about being a nerd now as an adult, as a full-grown adult human, past the age of 30 now, oh my god, as opposed to being a nerd when I was younger, when I first really started identifying with the idea of being a nerd and being a nerdy person. Before I dive too deep into this, I do just want to clarify what I mean when I say nerd, because sometimes people use the word nerd kind of interchangeably with the word geek. And yes, there's a lot of overlap between nerds and geeks. There are a lot of people like me who I consider myself both a nerd and a geek. But typically when you say geek, you mean someone who's very much into pop culture fandoms, sci-fi fantasy, video games, that sort of thing, more on the pop culture end of things. Whereas nerd is more so someone who is maybe studious or a reader or a researcher, really into science, really into music and orchestra, that sort of thing. Again, lots of overlap, especially in the reader community, for example, which I am very much part of. Probably the reason a lot of people conflate the two words or use them kind of interchangeably, but to me there's very much a difference because there are some people who are just nerds but not very geeky, and there are some people who are very much geeks but not very nerdy. I'm both, so they both definitely apply in my case, but in this video I'm going to focus more so on the nerd aspect of things, the reader in me, the studious person in me, the curious person in me, rather than the fandoms and stuff that I really, really love, as you can see. I am a person who has pretty much always identified with the idea of being a nerd. I think even from the time I was little, before I would even necessarily start describing myself, I think people would describe me as a nerdy kid. And once I started to think about who I was and my place in the world, nerdiness definitely was something that defined me. I started reading really early. I love to read, I love to write, I love to study, I love to get good grades. I loved video games and things like that, which I don't really know if I'd put that more in the nerd category or the geek category, but I loved it nonetheless. I started playing violin from a very young age as well, and I got into orchestra. I absolutely loved it. I started making most of my friends in my sort of orchestra and music circles. Most of my friends were readers or musicians or both. As an adult, there are definitely some aspects of this that have looked similar in that most of my friends and the people that I connect with are people who have shared interests, but it definitely has been a little bit different, especially when it comes to, I guess, the encouragement or like the benefits that you get from being a nerd. When you're in school and university, there's definitely very much a reward system in place. Like the nerds in the class were the ones who really enjoyed the subject material, or even if you didn't enjoy certain classes, like, I mean, the nerdiest person in the world is gonna have a class or two that they really don't like. But I would find myself enjoying classes that had nothing to do with even my major. Like I had a chem class, a chemistry class in my undergrad that I remember just loving. And a lot of people around me were people who needed chemistry for their majors, and I was not one of those people. I just needed a science credit and it happened to be chemistry. And I ended up really liking chemistry for that semester. Never went back to it, never have gone back to it really, but I really liked it. So sometimes I would latch onto things that weren't necessarily in my wheelhouse already. But ultimately, being a nerd meant usually liking most of your classes, enjoying at least aspects of the class experience, the studying experience, being someone who cared a lot about studying, about good grades. Oftentimes someone who did get good grades, but even if you didn't get them, you would care really, really deeply about them. And that was absolutely me. As an adult, being a nerd is more so something that just drives curiosity. Curiosity becomes a lot more intentional as an adult. It's not something that is asked of you in a lot of ways. It kind of depends, I guess, on your field and your job and your surroundings. But in a lot of ways, I've found that it's not expected, it's not required, and it's not even really rewarded in the same way that curiosity and that kind of ambition, nerdy ambition, is when you're a student. When you're a student, you have classes, you have expectations, you have, every time you come and you sit down in that class, you're probably going to be posed questions that maybe you hadn't thought about. You're going to be expected to perform in certain ways, whether it's speaking in class or writing in class or taking an exam or, any sort of ways that classes test you and quiz you and prompt you to do something and prompt you to learn something. Learning is your job. All of the expectations that were placed on you, or at least the vast majority of them, had to do with learning. Your teacher's approval, your grades, your sometimes kind of class status, whether or not people in the class really liked you or remembered you. The way that the kind of reward system is structured in university definitely rewards being nerdy, regardless of whether or not that is where you personally found your success or your enjoyment in university. It definitely can be structured that way, and for people like me who are very naturally nerdy and curious and studious, it was definitely something that I found a lot of fun in and a lot of gratification in. And it was very different coming out of university, getting my first jobs, and then the kind of adulthood, I guess, slump set in. And that's when I had to start kind of finding my own way of being a nerd as an adult.
You heard about Pluto? It's messed up, right?
Because it is different. The way that you think of yourself and people think of you as a nerd can be very different, depending on your environment and maybe your job or your career, where you've kind of set up your expectations for success. I'm using this a lot, I feel like, in this video. I don't know why, but I just feel like so many of these things and these ideas are up for interpretation. Maybe this is just me being an extra nerd, but I'll try to stop doing this because I'm kind of driving myself crazy. Curiosity can be something that is more of a bother, really, in a lot of ways, especially when maybe you're curious about something that is more interesting, more nerdy, and maybe your job or your immediate project or your immediate task doesn't necessarily call for that. Maybe it calls for a much more surface level sort of approach. I've also found that adulthood can, not always, but can come with a lot of like monotony in routines, for example. Now, I'm a type of person who I do like certain things to be in a routine, like my coffee in the morning, for example. This is my afternoon coffee in this particular moment, but I always have to start the mornings with a coffee, and if I don't, my whole day is thrown off. But if I find myself kind of locked into too much of a routine when it comes to my daily tasks or, you know, whatever job I have in that particular moment, that can be very, very frustrating and very stagnating in a lot of ways. Sometimes with certain aspects of life and decisions and responsibilities, I felt like being a nerd is actually something that the world is trying to stomp out of me and stop me from being, because I don't have time to deep dive something as much as I want to, or that particular thing that I think would be really useful isn't really valued by whoever is expecting that thing from me. It can sometimes just be, you know, doing things that you've done many, many times before, just you have to do them again this week. It can be responding to emails. It can be just checking things off your list, you know, constantly. Small things, not necessarily big, in-depth things or interesting things. Just what's expected of you. You know, sometimes that's all that is needed in a week. And that's not nearly as interesting as, you know, a week of classes. There's so much that is constantly learning and changing and driving that sort of nerdy personality trait in those of us who are nerds that you don't necessarily get in adulthood. So you really do have to seek out your nerdiness. A lot of times you have to seek out those outlets that will allow you to continue to be a nerd and to feel fulfilled and gratified in that aspect of your life, which for me kind of filters over everything else. The career that I've gone into, the jobs that I've sought out, the hobbies that I have, the person that I married, the people that I have as really good friends and I surround myself with, all of that really does connect in some way to my nerdiness. It might sound like being a nerd is a lot harder as an adult, and I think definitely it is in a lot of ways. You know, you don't necessarily have the instant gratification, or the, you know, system is not necessarily set up in a way that rewards being a nerd, and it can be more difficult to meet people who are nerdy and to connect in those ways. I also think sometimes society
sucks. I don't even consider myself a part of society. FYI.
The world kind of treats you differently if you are a nerdy person. Like even something as simple as wearing this t-shirt, I feel like people might judge me a bit more now being, you know, in my 30s as opposed to when I was 18 or 22 or whatever. But at the same time, upon reflecting a lot about this, I also see some potential benefits or some potentially good ways that it's evolved. For example, I think that being a nerd as an adult also can open up a lot more doors. Like when I was at university, I was a lit major. I studied literature, I studied music, I studied writing. I had my, you know, other classes, like I mentioned chemistry and science and stuff like that. You know, I had those classes. It will depend on your university as well, but in American universities, which is where I did my undergrad, you had to take, you know, a certain amount of classes in different types of fields. But generally, you know, you niched down a lot and there was a lot of variety within that niche, maybe more so than some aspects of adult life. But ultimately, you really could find yourself focusing entirely on a range of subjects within a very small umbrella, let's say. As opposed to adulthood, especially if you're pursuing your nerdy passions outside of maybe your career or your responsibilities and your expectations, because you're not looking for rewards necessarily with your nerdiness, you're just doing it because you love it. I found that being a nerd can be so much more in a lot of ways too. For example, one of my recent obsessions has been geology and stones and natural history in general. Dinosaurs, for example. Let's talk about dinosaurs because it's kind of on theme with this shirt. One of my favorite things in the world now, and just in the past few years I've discovered how much I love it, is dinosaurs. From the museums and the fossils to Jurassic Park movies. I absolutely love Jurassic Park movies, Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, all of it. I call it affectionately my dino trash. and I love watching my dino trash. That's actually a good example of a crossover between geek and nerd as well, because Jurassic Park is very much sci-fi speculative. It's definitely on the geek side, but also it can be incredibly nerdy, especially the way that I approach it, because I will find myself sitting through half an hour of my beloved dino trash and just there for the dino attacks and, you know, action scenes and suspense and all the things that those movies can sometimes deliver depending on the movie. But at other points of the movie, I will inevitably end up on some random rabbit hole, and it's usually about some dinosaur that they mention or something that's portrayed on screen, and I'm like, can a T-Rex really swim like that? Is that based off of anything that's actually science or thought to be or potentially science? And I'll end up on, you know, National Geographic, which yes, is a tab that is currently open on my phone. Or maybe it's something having to do with the filmmaking itself, like the movie and the behind the scenes aspects of that. All aspects of my nerdiness and all the things that I love and I'm curious about.
Fine, no more dinosaur stuff. Can I talk about fossils?
Maybe the hardest thing about being a nerdy adult is just being able to channel that energy in some way and to find different fulfillment than necessarily what you might have before. Because there's not always a medal at the end of the race. You know, there's not always something to gain from it. Maybe if I had to find a sort of thesis statement in all of this, which I don't have to because this isn't an essay and this isn't for a class and I can do what I want because it's my channel and my videos. But if I had to, because I still have the urge to, maybe it would be that being a nerd is not something that you just outgrow. You might outgrow a certain interest, or you might outgrow a certain hobby, or you might change careers a million times. But if you're a nerdy type of person like me, and especially if you always have been, you're gonna continue to be. It'll just become a more natural part of you and a more intrinsic part of how you approach the world. You approach it through curious eyes, through eyes that constantly want to discover whether or not you need to discover, whether or not your environments are encouraging that nerdiness, whether or not your responsibilities require you to approach something with a nerdy, you know, mindset. You're gonna do it anyway. You're gonna look at the world through that lens anyway. And for me, that is the most gratifying, but also just the most fun way. With all of that being said, I think it's probably time to wrap up this video because I've probably talked enough. But there are so many other facets of this topic that I probably could continue to talk about in a future video, whether it's something that I just forgot to mention or it's something that I haven't even thought about yet. So if there's something that comes to mind for you that I didn't talk about in this video or I didn't really develop in this video, let me know in the comments below and maybe I will make a continuation in the future. I'd also love it if you would leave me a comment below about your connection with nerdiness, whether you're someone like me who has always kind of identified as a nerd and continues to, or whether you're someone who used to, but maybe has kind of lost touch with your nerdiness as you've gotten older, or maybe the opposite. Maybe you didn't ever consider yourself to be a nerd, but now you're super interested in nerdy things, and maybe that's how you found my channel. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you very soon in another video that is guaranteed to be nerdy.